At this point, the remember machinery is basically working, but there are a couple of really subtle bugs in our program, and I want to show you how those work. So the first subtlety is related to this method here, this logout inside of destroy. So this causes a problem if we do something like this. If we have one browser window where we log in, click login, and then open another browser window in the same place. Let's just So what happens if we log out here? Now we're logged out, but over here we're still, well, we're logged out, but it looks like we're logged in. So in particular, we can do this, and that causes an error. So what's happening here is that we've actually clicked on that link, and it gets routed to destroy, and we're trying to log out, but there's no way to log out because in user.forget, the user is nil. And the reason for that is because we're doing forget of current user, but current user is nil when we log out. This is the sort of thing that's so subtle that I really like to write a test before fixing it. So we can actually fix it just by calling logout only if the user is logged in. It's very easy to fix. But first I'm going to write a quick test. Go to here. So this is the user's login test. That's what we're using to test this sort of stuff. That's right here. So after logging out, it's here. Let's log out again. So we're just going to do delete logout path. We get the same error. This is what happened before. The current user is nil, so we can't call forget on it right here. So we can fix it over here by doing this. It should be green. Great. The second problem is even subtler, and I should mention that both of these subtleties were pointed out by Rails tutorial readers, which I really appreciate. So let me show you this. This is incredibly subtle. So suppose that I'm logged in two different browsers. So here's Chrome and here's Opera. So I'm logged in both of these browsers. Suppose now I log out over here. Because this forgot the user, it just changed the remember digest from what it was before to nil. Now this still works fine in Opera. If you click around, go to the profile. And that's because of this session. It's now pulling out the session of user ID, so it's never hitting this branch. But what happens if I close Opera? If I quit and restart it, now it gives me an error. What happened here is now the session is gone, this is gone, so it's hitting this branch of current user. It's saying, oh, I still see cookies signed of user ID. It's pulling the user out because that user is valid. So this is not nil, this user. And so it's hitting user.authenticated. It's getting to this part of the if statement. And that then goes over here and calls this. And that calls bcrypt password.new of remember digest. But remember, when we logged out in Chrome, it set the remember digest to nil. So that's what caused this error. This is the error that gets raised. Bcrypt error is invalid hash. The invalid hash in this case is the result of remember digest being nil. We can fix this just by returning false if the remember digest is nil, so it never gets to this line. But as before, I'd really like to write a test to catch the problem. So let's go to the user test. So let's add a test for the authenticated method. Of course, before we wrote an integration test, but it's really hard to write an integration test that simulates this two-browser scenario. But luckily, it's pretty easy to test right in the model. Now, it actually doesn't matter which remember token. Remember, we're calling this authenticated with a remember token, but it doesn't matter because it's never going to get there. So this digest is nil. So what's going on here is that this @user is not saved. So this @user doesn't have a digest. Its remember digest is nil. So it doesn't matter what token we give it. Let's just give it an empty string. Oops, it should be authenticated question mark. Right, so this here should return false if we call authenticated question mark when the @user has no remember digest. So this is failing. It's actually an error because it's an exception. So we can just return false if remember digest is nil. There we go. So if we refresh this, now it works fine. By the way, you could definitely do something like if remember digest.nil false else this here. So you could do if else, just like this. This is the same thing. But I like the explicitness of just saying, just return. If the remember digest is nil, return right away, don't do anything else. But the two are equivalent. All right, with those two subtle bugs tested and fixed, our remember machinery is now completely working. This is essentially equivalent to what you might find on an industrial grade website like GitHub or Bitbucket. When you go to log in, it will now remember this session for 20 years, unless I log out.